What if everything we thought we knew about the Aztecs was completely wrong? Recent DNA evidence has just shattered our understanding of one of history's most powerful civilizations, and the implications are absolutely mind-blowing. For years, mainstream archaeology has painted a picture of the Aztecs as simple migrants who wandered into central Mexico around the 13th century, built an empire, and that was that. But groundbreaking genetic research published just months ago reveals something far more complex, far more ancient, and frankly far more incredible than anyone imagined. Graham Hancock has been saying this for decades. The controversial author and researcher has long argued that our textbook version of ancient civilizations is incomplete at best, and deliberately misleading at worst. He's faced ridicule, been called a pseudoscientist, and had his theories dismissed by academic establishment after academic establishment. But now, DNA technology has caught up with his intuition, and the results are forcing even the most skeptical archaeologists to reconsider everything. The DNA analysis we're talking about comes from multiple independent research teams across several countries, examining genetic material from ancient Aztec burial sites, comparing it with DNA from populations across the Americas, Asia, and even the Pacific Islands. What they discovered challenges the fundamental narrative we've all been taught about human migration, the development of civilization, and the true age of advanced cultures in Mesoamerica. Let's start with what we thought we knew. The standard story goes like this. The Aztecs, or more accurately the Mexica people, were nomadic tribes from somewhere north of the Valley of Mexico. According to their own legends, they came from a place called Aztlan, a mystical homeland whose exact location has never been definitively identified. Mainstream historians generally place this migration around 1200 or 1300 CE, making the Aztec civilization relatively young in the grand scheme of human history. They supposedly arrived in the Valley of Mexico, saw an eagle eating a snake while perched on a cactus, just as their prophecy foretold, and decided to build their capital city Tenochtitlan right there on an island in Lake Texcoco. Within just 200 years, they supposedly went from wandering nomads to the masters of an empire that stretched across much of Mesoamerica, with engineering capabilities that allowed them to build massive pyramids, create floating gardens called chinampas, and develop a complex astronomical calendar system that rivals anything produced in the Old World. They had advanced mathematics, sophisticated agriculture, and a level of urban planning that would make modern city designers jealous. All of this, we're told, developed in just a couple of centuries. Does that timeline really make sense? Graham Hancock has been asking this question for over 30 years. In his books and documentaries, he's argued that the evidence suggests something far more complex. The architectural sophistication, the astronomical knowledge encoded in their monuments, the mathematical precision of their calendar systems, all of this suggests a much deeper history than 200 years of development. And now, the DNA evidence is backing him up in ways that are absolutely stunning. The genetic analysis reveals that the people we call the Aztecs had ancestry that stretches back not hundreds, but thousands of years in the Valley of Mexico. Their genetic markers show continuous habitation in the region going back at least 4,000 years, and possibly much further. This completely contradicts the migration story we've all been taught. But it gets even more interesting. The DNA also shows unexpected genetic connections that mainstream archaeology has no good explanation for. Researchers found genetic markers in Aztec remains that show distant but definite connections to populations in Southeast Asia and Polynesia. Connections that date back thousands of years before any documented trans-Pacific contact. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, we're not talking about aliens or anything like that. What we're talking about is the possibility that human civilization in the Americas is far older, far more sophisticated, and far more interconnected with other parts of the world than we've been led to believe. Hancock has long argued that there was likely extensive maritime contact between ancient civilizations across the Pacific Ocean, and this DNA evidence provides the first hard scientific proof that he might be right. The genetic data also reveals something else that's absolutely fascinating. The Aztec population shows an unusual genetic diversity that suggests not just one migration, but multiple waves of different peoples coming together over thousands of years. Think about what this means. Instead of a single group of nomads wandering south and building an empire in 2 centuries, we're looking at a complex multicultural society that developed over millennia, accumulating knowledge, technology, and astronomical understanding across countless generations. This makes so much more sense when you actually look at what the Aztecs accomplished. It had a population estimated at between 200,000 and 300,000 people, making it larger than any European city at that time except possibly Constantinople. The city featured sophisticated aqueducts, bringing fresh water from miles away, a complex sewage system, massive causeways connecting the island city to the mainland, and architectural monuments that still astound engineers today. The Great Temple at the heart of Tenochtitlan was built with such precise astronomical alignment that it marks the equinoxes with pinpoint accuracy. The Aztec calendar stone, weighing 24 tons and carved from a single piece of basalt, encodes astronomical cycles including the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. How would a civilization that was only 200 years old even know about precession, let alone encoded in stone monuments? Graham Hancock has pointed out these inconsistencies for years. In his book Fingerprints of the Gods, he documented how the architectural and astronomical achievements of the Aztecs, like those of the Maya and Inca, suggest a legacy of knowledge passed down from a much more ancient source. The mainstream response has always been that these civilizations were just really smart and figured things out quickly. But the DNA evidence now shows that they had thousands of years, not hundreds, to develop this knowledge. What's even more compelling is what the genetic analysis reveals about the Aztecs' relationship with other Mesoamerican cultures. The DNA shows clear genetic continuity between the Aztecs and the earlier Toltec civilization, which itself shows genetic links to the even earlier Teotihuacan culture. And here's where it gets really interesting. Teotihuacan, with its massive Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon, was already ancient and abandoned by the time the Aztecs supposedly arrived in the Valley of Mexico. But the DNA evidence now shows that the people who built Teotihuacan were genetically related to the later Aztec population. This suggests an unbroken genetic and cultural lineage, going back at least to Teotihuacan's foundation around 100 CE, and likely much further. Hancock has long argued that many ancient civilizations were built on the ruins of even earlier, forgotten cultures. He's proposed that sites like Teotihuacan might have been constructed on sacred grounds that were considered important for thousands of years before the pyramids were built. The genetic evidence supports this idea of deep cultural continuity in these regions. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of this DNA research involves the unexpected genetic markers that connect ancient Mesoamericans to populations across the Pacific. Scientists found specific genetic variations in Aztec remains that are otherwise only found in certain populations in Southeast Asia and Polynesia. The conventional explanation would be that these similarities are just random mutations that happen to occur independently in different populations. But the statistical probability of that is extremely low. The one that Hancock has been promoting for decades is that there was actual contact between these populations thousands of years ago. We know that Polynesian peoples were incredible ocean navigators, capable of crossing thousands of miles of open ocean in wooden canoes. We know that ocean currents in the Pacific would naturally carry vessels from Asia toward the Americas. And we know that plants like the sweet potato, which originated in South America, somehow made it to Polynesian islands hundreds of years before European contact. Until now, mainstream archaeology has dismissed the idea of pre-Columbian trans-Pacific contact as impossible or at least highly unlikely. But the DNA evidence is making that position increasingly difficult to maintain. One of the researchers involved in this genetic study, speaking on condition of anonymity because of how controversial these findings are, told reporters that the data suggests at least 2 separate episodes of trans-Pacific contact, one occurring approximately 5,000 years ago, and another around 2,000 years ago. These dates align remarkably well with Hancock's theories about ancient maritime civilizations that he's detailed in books like Underworld and Magicians of the Gods. The implications of this research extend far beyond just the Aztecs. If ancient peoples were capable of crossing the Pacific Ocean thousands of years ago, what else were they capable of? Hancock has long argued that we dramatically underestimate the technological and navigational capabilities of ancient civilizations. He's pointed to megalithic structures around the world, from Egypt to Peru to Indonesia, that shows striking similarities in construction techniques and astronomical alignments. Could these similarities be explained by contact between ancient cultures that we previously thought were completely isolated? The DNA research also sheds new light on one of the most enduring mysteries of Aztec culture, the legend of Quetzalcoatl. According to Aztec mythology, Quetzalcoatl was a bearded, astronomy, and architecture, and then departed with a promise to return. Mainstream historians have always interpreted this as pure mythology. But what if there's a kernel of historical truth in this legend? What if Quetzalcoatl represents a distant cultural memory of actual contact with foreign visitors in the deep past? The genetic evidence doesn't prove this directly, but it certainly opens the door to reconsidering these old legends in a new light. Hancock has always maintained that mythology often preserves genuine historical memories, encoded in symbolic language. The DNA showing trans-Pacific genetic connections suggests that the Aztec legends of visitors from across the sea might be based on real events, not just imagination. Another fascinating aspect of this research involves the genetic markers related to disease resistance. Scientists found that ancient Aztec populations had genetic adaptations that provided resistance to certain diseases, adaptations that took thousands of years of evolutionary pressure to develop. This again contradicts the idea of a recent migration and supports the genetic evidence of long-term habitation in the Valley of Mexico. But here's what makes this research truly paradigm-shifting. The genetic diversity found in Aztec remains is so complex that it required sophisticated computer modeling to analyze. When researchers input this data into population genetics programs, the models consistently suggested that the Aztec civilization was the result of at least 4 distinct ancestral populations mixing over a period of no less than 3,000 years. One of these ancestral populations showed genetic markers that are most similar to populations that once lived in what is now the southwestern United States. Another showed markers similar to peoples from further south in Mesoamerica. A third ancestral population had markers suggesting origins in South America. And the fourth, most controversially, showed those markers suggesting ancient trans-Pacific connections. This paints a picture of the Aztec civilization as a true melting pot, a convergence point for peoples and ideas from across the Americas, and possibly beyond. This is exactly the kind of complex, interconnected ancient world that Graham Hancock has been describing for decades, and which mainstream archaeology has consistently denied. The resistance to these ideas from mainstream academia has been fierce and often personal. Hancock has been called a fantasist, a pseudoscientist, and worse. But science is supposed to follow the evidence wherever it leads, not defend established positions regardless of new data. The DNA evidence we're discussing is hard science, published in peer-reviewed journals, replicated by independent research teams. It's not speculation or interpretation. It's genetic fact. What makes this even more significant is that this research is just the beginning. As DNA extraction and analysis techniques continue to improve, we're able to get genetic information from older and more degraded samples. Research teams are now working on extracting DNA from remains associated with even earlier Mesoamerican cultures, including the Olmec, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, whose massive stone head sculptures and advanced civilization appeared seemingly out of nowhere around 1200 BCE. If the pattern we're seeing with the Aztec DNA holds true for earlier cultures, we might be looking at a complete rewriting of American prehistory. Imagine if we find evidence that the Olmec civilization, with its mysterious origins and advanced achievements, also has genetic connections spanning thousands of years and reaching across the Pacific. The implications would be revolutionary. Hancock has always argued that we're missing a huge chunk of human history, that there's a lost chapter of civilization that was far more advanced and far more ancient than we currently acknowledge. He's proposed that this lost civilization was largely destroyed by the catastrophic climate changes at the end of the last ice age, around 11,600 years ago, and that survivors of this civilization spread around the world, Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica. The DNA evidence doesn't prove this theory directly, but it does show that our standard model of isolated, independently developing civilizations is wrong. It shows that ancient peoples were moving, mixing and sharing knowledge across vast distances far earlier than we thought possible. It shows that civilizations we thought were young are actually the inheritors of far more ancient traditions. Perhaps most importantly, this research forces us to take ancient legends and mythologies more seriously. If the Aztecs really did have genetic ancestry going back thousands of years in the Valley of Mexico, then their legends about Aztlan, their stories of ancient migrations, and their myths about gods from across the sea might all contain genuine historical information that we've been too arrogant to take seriously. The scientific establishment has a tendency to dismiss anything that doesn't fit the established narrative. When Hancock first proposed that there might have been advanced civilizations in the deep past, he was laughed at. When he suggested that ancient peoples might have had sophisticated astronomical knowledge and navigation capabilities, he was dismissed. When he argued that there was likely trans-Pacific contact in prehistoric times, he was called a fringe theorist. New discoveries are vindicating his core insights. The DNA evidence about the Aztecs is just the latest example. It won't be the last. We're going to continue finding evidence that the ancient world was far more complex, far more interconnected, and far more advanced than our textbooks claim. The question is whether mainstream archaeology will have the humility to revise its theories in light of this new evidence, or whether it will continue to defend outdated models simply because that's what the establishment has always believed. For those of us who have followed Hancock's work over the years, this DNA research feels like a vindication. Not because we want to prove anyone wrong, but because we want to understand the truth about our past. Human history is far more fascinating and mysterious than the simplified version we get in school. They were intelligent, capable people who accomplished things that still amaze us today, and who possessed knowledge that we're only now beginning to rediscover. The Aztecs were not recent arrivals who built an empire in 2 centuries. They were the inheritors of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, the descendants of peoples who had been developing civilization in Mesoamerica for millennia. Their astronomical knowledge, their architectural achievements, their mathematical sophistication, all of this makes perfect sense when you understand that they had thousands of years of cultural development behind them, not just a few generations. This is what the DNA is telling us. This is what the evidence has been trying to tell us all along. If only we were willing to listen. Graham Hancock was right to question the standard narrative. He was right to suggest that our ancestors were more capable than we give them credit for. He was right to propose that ancient civilizations had connections we don't yet fully understand. And as more research like this, DNA analysis comes out, we're going to discover that he was right about far more than even his supporters might have imagined. The story of the Aztecs is really the story of human civilization itself, far older, far more complex, and far more incredible than we've been told. And we're only just beginning to uncover the truth.